Close your eyes for a second and listen to the room you're in right now. A refrigerator humming, traffic somewhere outside, a fan, a phone buzzing, the low electrical whine that lives underneath almost every modern space. You've probably never experienced true silence in your entire life. Not because silence doesn't exist, but because the world you were born into never stopped making noise long enough for you to hear it. 10,000 years ago, that wasn't true. And the difference between that world and this one isn't just about volume. It's about what silence actually meant and what it cost to break it. Let's start with the obvious. 10,000 years ago, there were no engines, no machinery, no electricity, no combustion of any kind beyond fire. This sounds like a simple fact, but the implications are staggering when you actually sit with them. Every single sound a human being encountered in a single day was produced by something alive, something moving through air or water, or something burning. There was no ambient hum, no baseline noise, floor humming beneath conscious thought the way it does for us now. Soundscape researchers, a field pioneered by acoustic ecologist Bernie Krause, have spent decades studying what's called the acoustic environment, essentially the full sonic fingerprint of a landscape. Krause's research draws a distinction between three categories of sound: geophony, the sounds of wind, water and geological movement; biophony, the collective sound of living organisms, insects, birds, mammals; and anthropophony, the sounds humans produce. 10,000 years ago, anthropophony was a tiny, quiet fraction of the total soundscape. Today, in most inhabited parts of the world, it's dominant, often drowning out the other two almost entirely. Here's what that actually meant on the ground, or rather, in the air. In a temperate forest 10,000 years ago, the loudest consistent sounds would have been biological: birdsong at dawn, insect choruses in the heat of the day, the distant calls of larger animals, wind moving through leaves and grass, human sound, voices, footsteps. The crack of a tool striking stone would have been comparatively rare and localized. A hunter-gatherer band of 20 to 50 people spread across a wide territory simply didn't generate much noise relative to the landscape around them. This matters more than it might seem to at first, because sound and silence weren't just background conditions, they were survival information. In a world without engines, every unusual sound carried meaning. A snapped twig could mean prey, or it could mean predator. A sudden hush in bird activity, the kind experienced hikers still notice today, was itself a warning sign, since birds often go quiet when a predator moves through an area. Human hearing and human attention to sound evolved under conditions where auditory information was precious, unfiltered by mechanical noise, and often the difference between eating and being eaten. Anthropologists studying contemporary hunter-gatherer societies, groups whose lifestyles offer partial insight into ancient acoustic environments, have noted just how attuned these communities remain to subtle environmental sound. Researchers working with groups like the Hadza in Tanzania have documented an acute sensitivity to distant animal calls, wind shifts, and water sounds, an attentiveness that modern urban life has largely trained out of most of us simply because we no longer need it and because there's rarely enough quiet to practice it. Now here's where it gets genuinely strange to think about. 10,000 years ago, human-made sound wasn't just quieter, it was also, in a very real sense, more expensive. Every deliberate sound a person made cost something. Speaking loudly could carry for a significant distance in a quiet landscape, potentially alerting predators or rival groups to your location. Striking stone tools, cooking over fire, moving through underbrush, All of it left an acoustic trace that had to be weighed against the risk of being heard by something you didn't want finding you. In this sense, silence wasn't just the absence of sound, it was a form of safety, actively maintained rather than passively experienced. Compare that to your relationship with sound today. You probably make noise constantly without a second thought, talking on the phone in public, playing music through speakers, letting a car idle in a driveway. None of it carries meaningful risk. Sound has become, for most of human history's most recent sliver, essentially free. This shift from sound being costly and rare to being cheap and constant is genuinely one of the more overlooked transformations in human history. We tend to focus on the visual changes, cities, roads, skylines, but the acoustic transformation of the planet has been just as dramatic and arguably far less examined. Archaeoacoustics, a relatively young field of research, has started to explore how ancient humans specifically engaged with sound in constructed spaces. Studies of painted caves in France and Spain, sites used tens of thousands of years ago, have found a striking correlation between the locations of cave paintings and areas with unusual acoustic properties: echo, resonance, reverberation. Researchers, including Igor Reznikov, have proposed that ancient people may have specifically sought out and marked these resonant locations, suggesting that sound itself, not just image, played a deliberate role in how these spaces were used and experienced. If this research holds up, it means early humans weren't just passively living inside a quiet world. They were actively listening to it, mapping it, and building meaning around its acoustic properties in ways we're only beginning to understand. So what did silence actually sound like 10,000 years ago? Not silence in the sense of total absence. That's essentially never existed anywhere with air and life in it, but a kind of layered, structured quiet. Wind, distant water, birds, insects, occasional animal calls, and beneath all of it, long stretches where nothing at all demanded attention. A soundscape with texture and rhythm, rising and falling with the time of day and season, entirely unfiltered by anything mechanical. Modern researchers studying remaining acoustically pristine environments, places like remote sections of national parks with minimal human infrastructure, have found something worth sitting with. Acoustic ecologist Gordon Hempton has spent years searching for what he calls true quiet zones, places where you can go 15 minutes or more without hearing a single human-made sound. His research suggests fewer than a dozen such locations remain in the entire continental United States. 10,000 years ago, nearly everywhere on Earth would have qualified. Here's the part worth carrying with you: that baseline hum you live inside now, the traffic, the machinery, the electrical whine underneath every room, isn't neutral. Emerging research on noise pollution has linked chronic ambient noise exposure to elevated stress hormones, disrupted sleep, and even measurable cardiovascular effects. Your nervous system, in some fundamental sense, is still the same nervous system that evolved inside that ancient quieter world, still calibrated for a baseline of relative silence that essentially no longer exists anywhere humans live in large numbers. You're not imagining it when a walk in a truly quiet forest feels different, almost restorative, in a way a walk through a city never quite does. You're not just enjoying nature, you're briefly stepping back into the acoustic conditions your entire biology was shaped by, conditions your ancestors lived inside every single day of their lives, and that you now have to travel specifically to find. 10,000 years ago, silence wasn't rare, It was the default state of the world, occasionally interrupted by sound that meant something. Today, that relationship has completely inverted. Silence has become the rare, expensive thing, something we now have to seek out, protect, and sometimes pay for, while noise has become the ever-present background hum we've simply learned to stop hearing. Maybe that's the real story here. It's not that the ancient world was quieter. It's that quiet used to be the norm your entire biology expected, and somewhere along the way, without really noticing, we built a world that almost never lets you experience it.